Headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Well, let's talk to Bobby Friedman. He's a barrister and you'll know him well on the show. He's also the biographer of John Bercow. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Now, I mean, there's no doubt at all John Bercow brought the House of Commons to life, I suppose. It became very well known, probably far more well known than any other Commons speaker in any era, let alone just the modern era. But this independent inquiry upholding 21 allegations against John Bercow by 3 former members of staff, going back 12 years, basically saying, yep, he was a bully, he was a liar, and he's got no place in Parliament. What do you make of that ruling?
Well, it's not a surprise, is it? I mean, it's something that everybody in Westminster knew about. And I think this is the particularly important point over the last few years, that it became perfectly obvious that the findings that have now been made by an independent parliamentary inquiry, that he's a bully, that was something that was known about in Westminster. But he was kept in post by people because it was politically expedient for them to keep a bully in the post. And after he left, the Labour Party tried to nominate him for a peerage, and we saw a whole raft of politicians coming out and giving these valedictory speeches about him when either they knew or they ought to have known, because everybody in Westminster with any kind of political antennae would have known about that. So I think it's an indictment on him, also an indictment on an awful lot of other people too.
When indeed, Emily Thornberry, who was then Shadow Foreign Secretary back in 2018, she basically said, we need to keep him in situ, regardless of allegations. Margaret Beckett, I mean, who was, then a backbench Labour MP, but had, of course, been deputy leader of the Labour Party. I mean, she was just completely and utterly blatant. She said very, very, very clearly, she wanted to keep his powder dry because we're going to embark on this huge constitutional experiment in which there may be a key role for the Speaker. And she said, abuse is terrible. It should be stopped. Behaviour should change anyway, whether the Speaker goes or not. But yes, if it comes to the constitutional future of this country, the most difficult decision we have made, not since the war, but possibly certainly in all our lifetimes, hundreds of years, yes, it trumps bad behaviour. These allegations were well known. They'd been investigated, and yet it didn't matter. It was OK for him to bully staff, OK for him to talk to MPs in a way that, I mean, even on camera, that was, I think, shocking to most people. It is still a workplace, after all. And yet they were willing to tolerate that because they thought he'd be useful in trying to stop Brexit. I mean, this has brought immense shame on the House of Commons, hasn't it?
Yes, I think it has. And look, at least Margaret Beckett was honest, because a lot of other MPs weren't honest about it, and they were trying to downplay the allegations or simply ignore them. At least she owned up to them. But to me, it is absolutely the wrong call. Bullying is entirely unacceptable. As I said, it was not new. It goes back years. When I was researching my book a decade ago, these were stories that I couldn't stand up, so I can't say that they were true. Yeah. I don't know if they're true or not, but people were certainly saying it back then. People were complaining about it to me back then, and so this has been something that's gone on. I would recommend people to Google the video of Tom Bradby, the ITN political editor, when he interviewed John Bercow on the day that John Bercow became Speaker. That was John Bercow's personality, at least one side of it. He's very Jekyll and Hyde, one side of it. So even from the very first day that he took the Speaker's chair, everyone knew how he could talk to people. We saw it in the House of Commons. And yet this was allowed to go on and on for years and years.
Yeah, I mean, again, even aside of the bullying, just the arrogant tone. I mean, I always loved Andrea Leadsom when she was standing up to Bercow when she was leader of the House of Commons and he was in the chair, and she just never took any of it. But MPs were cowed by him, so we can see why staff would have been. We're going to talk a little bit later to the former clerk of the House, one of the complainants, Lord Lisvane, but there was also Angus Sinclair and Kate Ems. They were private secretaries. I mean, Angus Sinclair is ex-Navy. I mean, what amazes me, and I've said this repeatedly on the show, and I've always been stunned by this, is that how this sort of rather pathetic, chumped-up little man was able to talk to everybody like they were sort of on the bottom of his shoe, and no one, for some bizarre reason, ever punched him in the face.
Well, that is a good question, isn't it? But he has had a lifetime of using his way of speaking as his way of beating people down. He does, he has archetypal short man syndrome, doesn't he? And unfortunately, he's always been this outsider throughout his life. He was too short. He wasn't attractive enough. He could never get a girlfriend. It was all rather unfortunate. But you would think by the time he became a 50-year-old man, he was Speaker of the House of Commons, he might have got over that. But clearly he hadn't. But he'd always used his way of speaking when he was a school kid, he used to read out other children's mistakes back to them and out loud in class. And that was because, in fairness to him, they did bully him. So it was his way of getting back at them. But what it meant is he has this really quite odd oratorical style, but in some ways quite impressive. But he doesn't know how to use it, and he uses it as this form of attack on other people. And that's why when he's nice, when he's friends with people, he can be a very, very nice person. But unfortunately, he has that Jekyll and Hyde personality. And when he wants to attack someone, he uses verbal attack as the way of doing it. I think he's never learned what's appropriate. Where's that line that he should stay on the right side?
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, he's dismissed the entire investigation. Parliamentary Standards Commissioner Catherine Stone, she's not qualified. The expert independent panel, not qualified. That's a kangaroo court. He dismisses everything and everyone that criticises him. Do you think? I mean, after your biography is very detailed about the psychology of the man, but do you think he actually believes that he hasn't done anything wrong?
I'm not sure he does. I mean, I think part of it, though, it comes back to this chip on his shoulder. He sees himself as the outsider, and he'll have seen it as people with more privilege than him, although, frankly, in many cases they weren't. But he sees it as people with greater chances than he had, more privileges than he had, so that somehow that he doesn't fit in, that his way of being isn't good enough, and that's why they're getting at him. But ultimately, he must know. And this is, to me, in fact, why the serial liar comment in the report is particularly important, because ultimately you have two people with very different recollections. Of course, as we all know the phrase, recollections may vary. But when it comes to things like this, it's hard to think that he doesn't know. He surely does remember these incidents, and it doesn't reflect well on him.
No, indeed. It doesn't. It really does not reflect on very well on MPs, and I think the Tories have done some very bad things when we look at what they tried to do to change the disciplinary system, the parliamentary standards system. I mean, under Boris Johnson, which I think has been appalling and unforgivable. But the willingness of Labour Remainers to keep this man in the chair because he was doing their bidding, I think, frankly, is morally untenable. Bobby Friedman, barrister and author of the biography Bercow, Mr. Speaker, Rowdy Living in the Tory Party. Thank you very much.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.